Dr. Sarah Hill, honey. Girl, this book, The Period Brain. Oh my goodness. I cannot wait for us to have a conversation about this. And congratulations. I know it's out tomorrow. By the time this goes live in a couple weeks, it will be out. Before we even get started, everyone just go get your copy. However you will get it. You get it on Audible, get it on Audible. You get a hard copy, get it on Kindle, get it where you fit in. Every woman needs to understand what's happening to their brain during the menstrual cycle, but particularly during our period. You and I have talked about this at length. My brain on perimenopause. I'm going to take a pause.
I mean, look, our brains are so sensitive to hormonal changes and they're wired to be that way. So it happens on purpose. But it definitely throws us for a loop when we're going through periods of intense hormonal change. And, it's really interesting because you've got this wonderful new book that you and I were talking about off camera that I love so much, The Perimenopause Revolution. And in a lot of ways, the things that you're talking about and touch upon in that book are very similar to the things that I talk about in the period brain, except on the level of a cycle instead of a lifetime. Because a lot of the turbulence that women experience as they're transitioning across the cycle, and in particular through the luteal phase, which is a period of really intense hormonal changes, is a time that can feel like psychological and physical upheaval. Right. And this, too, is what we experience as we're going through perimenopause. And so in a lot of ways, the hormonal changes that we experience across the cycle where we have these rapid periods of hormonal release and then we have less release and things are beginning to decline. A lot of that is sort of like a tiny snapshot of what happens across the lifetime as we go through puberty and then through a period of fertility. And then as we have our fertility sunset into perimenopause and menopause.
I love the fertility sunset. That's such a sweet way of describing that chaos.
I know, it's so funny because it feels like falling off a cliff.
It totally does.
Describe it as a beautiful sunset, and then maybe that will change people's experiences of it.
I love that so much. I mean, yeah, the hormone shifts, and you're a mama too. And so, you and I have been through puberty, postpartum, second puberty. We're in it now. You and I are in it together. And yes, and I mean, going through all these phases and changes, obviously in the research that you've done over the years and, connecting with half of the population over the years too, Sarah, gosh, this book is so timely. But what was the real driving force behind wanting to write this book? Kind of what was the impetus for you?
So for me, so many women that I know think of their body as the enemy.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of the reason that they feel like their body is the enemy is because they're not really given the tools that they need in order to thrive. And the sort of version of what it looks like to be normal and what looks like for normal energy needs and calorie intake and what looks like normal for your body's ability to recover and what's normal in terms of symptoms that we have for specific types of conditions, whether physical or psychological conditions that we have all been guided and grounded in a one-size-fits-all model that was based on men. And so many women, go through life doing everything right? They're eating the number of calories they're told they're supposed to eat. They're getting as much sleep as they're told that they need to get, right? They're visiting their doctor when they're having symptoms of illness, and they still feel terrible. And so I really was interested in trying to better understand how is it that our hormonal changes are changing our experiences as we transition across the cycle. And then if once we understand these things, is there a different version of what's normal for women? Right. So I wanted to create sort of a blueprint of what normal looks like if you're a female, because most of the, things that we believe are normal are one size fits all, right? We are told sexual desire is supposed to look like this, right? But if you're a woman, sexual desire looks different, right? Or, your calorie needs look like this. And it's no, that's not true either. If you're a woman, it cycles. And so it's really just talking about the way that we change across the cycle, whether it's our emotional changes, changes in sexual desire, changes in the way that we experience our body and experience the symptoms of chronic conditions, our recovery needs, our emotional needs, and how these things change across the cycle. So that way we can finally get a blueprint, almost like a owner's manual that was designed with the female body and the female brain in mind.
I love that. One of the things I've been talking about, because you and I are both in the circuit right now promoting the book, and I'm trying to be cheeky, a little bit fun about it. And I've been joking, and not so much. I mean, this is how, I remember giving myself such a hard time when I would be in a late luteal phase, that I wasn't able to push as hard and I wasn't able to do the workout that I was able to do just a week and a half ago. And so I've been saying that everyone loves day 12 us. Everybody, even us, right? We love that estradiol peak before luteinizing hormone comes into play, right before that ovulatory phase comes into play. And no one is celebrating day 26, version of us. Like everyone's like, what happened? What happened to you? And so I'd love for you to break it down a little bit about honoring ourselves in our luteal phase, because particularly also in perimenopause, which is a lot of my ladies in midlife, man, maybe once upon a time you had PMS symptoms 2 to 3 days prior to your period. And now, girl, it just stretches. It just becomes this continuum. You're like, is there a start and a stop? Like, it's just messy.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is messy. And ultimately, I think the first thing that we need to talk about is just like what is going on with a regular menstrual cycle. And I'm sure that many, probably all of your listeners, are very intimately familiar with the hormonal changes that happen across the cycle. But the thing that they might not spend a lot of time thinking about is that as we're cycling between our two hormones, our body and our brain are actually cycling between two different versions of ourselves that are optimized to do different things. Right. So when we have estrogen beginning to rise, like you said, like for me, I've always noticed like right around day 5, I can start to feel like,
Ooh, girl. It's, yes. Hello. Coming back to the scene. Although in Perry, it's not as, it's a little bit less, it's a little lackluster. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Hello, friend. Like, welcome.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. And you get that increase in energy and you start to feel a little bit more sexually motivated and you're feeling.
It's the mental game for me, Sarah. Like I feel the mental shift around day 5, day 6. Like my brain's like, bing.
Yeah, no, I feel very much that where it's almost like an awakening, like, oh, yes, hello, friend. And I just feel good and I want to be out and I want to be socializing and I feel attractive and I want sex and I'm, really drawn to my partner and just like being with him, like it hits different.
I love that. I never want it.
It just feels good.
Yay.
It's just a time that really feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, the body and the brain are optimized for attraction and sex. And this is job 1 in terms of the evolutionary quest for reproduction, right? And so our body sort of orients all of our resources toward things that make us maximally attractive. We smell better, we look more attractive, we move in a way that's more attractive, we tend to dress sexier, we want more sex, we are better, our brain is better able to distinguish, fine-tune differences between individual men to be able to help hone in on who's going to be the most compatible mate for us. It's like our brain and our body is rolling out the red carpet for both attraction and sex. And then after that egg gets released and you enter into the luteal phase and sex is no longer conceptive, right? And your body starts releasing progesterone. This is actually the brain and body's cue that it's time to start reorganizing everything in a way that is optimized instead for implantation and pregnancy, right? And so your body is like, pulls out the red carpet underneath your feet of sexiness. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, what is that?
Hunker down, girl. You may be pregnant.
Right. It's like you are preparing for pregnancy. Like we need energy. So we need calories. We need rest. And, we've got a lot of work to do. And one thing that women don't really appreciate is that their body is working really hard during the luteal phase. And it's like our heart rate goes up, our respiration rate goes up.
Our metabolic rate goes up. You can tell this is a metabolic event.
Yes, your body temperature rises as part of your calorie. And so this means that you need an average, like they find that women's metabolic rate goes up between like a 7 and 11%. So this is like almost an additional 150 to 200 calories a day if you're eating 2,000 calories a day. So, it's like not insignificant. This is like real stuff that's happening and your body is like needs fuel, it needs rest, and it needs protection. Like our body, as it's preparing for the possibility of pregnancy, is very much cued to signs of danger. And so sometimes women become more sensitive to signs of potential threat.
So more hypervigilant,
Yes,
would you call it?
hypervigilant. Yeah, and it's like a smoke detector, it's like a smoke detector is wired to be over vigilant, right? Which is why, it goes off.
Oh yeah, when you're cooking in the kitchen.
Yeah, it's like you're making microwave popcorn or, and it's like all of a sudden the smoke detector goes off and you're like, what? Like,
And my son's running outside, he's like, the smoke detector.
yeah, but it's so much better to have that happening than have your
Yeah,
house burn down
absolutely.
and have the smoke detector never go off. And our brain is the same way. It's like wired to be dialed into vigilance, like to signs
Yeah.
of danger. And
What about, curious, Sarah, I know I don't know how nuanced you got into this, but what if someone already has trauma in this phase? If that's already kind of happening, or complex PTSD, do you find that maybe there's more an over level of vigilance or maybe less stress response, like in terms of tolerance?
Okay, well, so two things on that. So one, 100%, like if you are somebody who has a history of trauma, that you're going to be more easily cued. So your brain is already wired to be like overly sensitive. And I say overly sensitive, just meaning that it's more, your smoke detector is more sensitive, right? And that, and obviously this is adaptive and, because it's like, if you have a history of smoke meaning fire, then anytime there's a trace of smoke, it makes good adaptive sense that your brain is saying fire, fire, fire. And then you add in the luteal phase and you add in these hormonal changes that actually make the fear centers of our brain become more interconnected with the other areas of our brain. And it's like we're on overdrive. Our brain is more receptive to potential signs of threat from all different areas of our lives that our brain is monitoring. And it's more likely to sound the alarm bells. So that's the first piece. So indeed, women who have a history of trauma are probably more likely to experience an even more exaggerated shift in their threat perception. But on top of that, there's a lot of really interesting research, and I'm curious to find out from you about whether this is also mirrored in perimenopause, because I'm guessing it is. But what research tends to find is that women who've had a history of trauma, that they tend to have worse PMS and that they're at a greater risk of developing PMDD than are women who do not have these experiences as part of their history. And the leading idea behind that is that dysregulation of your brain, your stress response, your brain, your HPA axis, your brain adrenal gland axis, that dysregulation there also then leads to dysregulation and being able to manage the stress of hormonal transitions. Right?
Yeah, the research is clear here. This was something I touched upon a little bit. I didn't go too far into the weeds of this conversation, but I have complex PTSD from trauma. And so it was really interesting for me to experience things that were coming up for review, or noticing my hypervigilance was kicking in stronger than I was like, oh, wow, I just noticed like things ratcheted up a little bit, and I was curious. And so often a lot of people who haven't, and I feel like it's the journey for a lifetime journey, in terms of healing trauma and just being really mindful about sending the brain safety signals. But particularly when we start to lose estrogen and progesterone and the brain becomes more sensitive, more hypervigilant, and low stress tolerance is just a normal occurrence for perimenopause, women will begin to experience, bouts of PTSD from when they had that trauma, or they're noticing their trauma responses are just more prevalent during this transition.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all, because, and this is like another one of these things where I think that women underappreciate their bodies. And that is, each month for a cycling woman, your body has to make all of these really complex adaptations to wild swings in hormones. So you have this big rise and fall of estrogen in the first half of the cycle. And then in the second half of the cycle, estrogen rises and falls again, and progesterone rises and falls in huge magnitudes. And it actually peaks at levels that are 10 times greater than the estrogen peak we have in the first half of the cycle. And so the amount of hormonal change that goes on in the second half of the cycle is just, it's astronomical. And that our body is able to quickly adapt to this in many cases is really remarkable. So even though women, as they transition across the cycle, do feel different because their body is shifting priorities, and again, shifting away from being optimized for state, for attraction and for sex, and into one that's like geared toward implantation and pregnancy, that we're able to adapt in this way is really remarkable. But what happens is that sometimes women aren't able to adapt, right? And one of the big reasons that women aren't able to adapt to this is because of dysregulation of their HPA axis from chronic stress, because we don't really appreciate that our hormonal changes are actually, I mean, that's a major stressor in the body. The body likes to maintain homeostasis, which is just a fancy way of saying it likes the status quo.
Yeah, it just wants to keep it normal. Can we just keep it chill over here, keep it steady?
Everything steady Eddie. And the female body is just like a constantly moving status quo, right? Our status quo is variable every day as our hormones shift. And so it takes a lot of tone in our HPA axis. And by tone, I just simply mean it takes a really reactive and sensitive HPA axis to be able to adjust all of the body's needs depending on what's going on with us hormonally. And for women who have dysregulation in their stress response because of things like trauma, that erodes at our ability to be resilient to hormonal changes. And for those women, so including yourself, that usually means that you're going to have a worse premenstrual experience. So during the week, and for some women, it's even the full 2 weeks of the luteal phase, that this can be a really challenging time emotionally as our body is struggling to keep up with those wild swings in hormone. But then also as you go into perimenopause, and again, you're going through a period of intense hormonal change. And unlike what goes on across a regular cycle, of course, it's unpredictable. And so you never exactly know what you're going to get. And so this can make it really...
It's so unpredictable. I always say the only thing that's predictable about any of this is the unpredictability, which is not reassuring by any means.
Right. Yeah. Having dysregulation with your stress response can really create havoc for women when they're in periods of hormonal transition. And like I said, I think that it's something that's not really appreciated very much. And it's just how challenging that is. Like what a stress that puts on the body to have to be able to quickly adapt. And, maintaining our body's ability to surf the waves of hormonal change is like one of the best things that we can do for ourselves, because we can ease the transition by making some lifestyle adjustments and many of the things that you talk about in your book for adjusting and to helping promote a smooth transition throughout perimenopause are the same types of things that actually help smooth the transitions across a normal cycle for a woman who's regularly cycling and can help to ease the stress of PMS.
I'd love to tap into the stress response system. I think you and I both know that chronic stress is so insidious. And the reason why I feel like it's insidious is two reasons. One, it drives oxidative stress. It co-elevates insulin, drives insulin resistance. It just creates inflammation and chaos in the body. Number two is because so many of us have been told, particularly women, that it's normal. It's normal to feel stressed. It's normal to have an insane to-do list that is impossible to achieve. And so I know that was very much the through line that you kind of started with at the beginning, was that, we're told that it's just going to be a hard journey. I remember being told three things. One, like once my period came online, my mom's like, it's going to really suck. It's like, get ready to suffer, girl, like buckle up. I was like, okay. So, and that was it. That was the conversation. Number two, like your body's going to tell you sometimes, don't listen. Just girl, keep at it. And that was it. Number three, just like bulldoze through. And it worked for a while until it didn't anymore. And so I got away with it in my 20s, but in my 30s, it was like a reckoning. And now I learned a lot in my 30s, and in my 40s, even though I felt like I had safeguarded myself a lot, the hormone shifts, I wasn't ready. And so I have built in so many strategies to manage my stress response system. One of the biggest one is walking. My brain is like, okay, everything's okay if we're taking a walk. But I'm curious, especially, I know that I've talked to so many friends and colleagues and community members where very much the same thing was told to them, that we were just women, we were cake pops running around, everything was cerebral and we didn't listen to anything else because what's the point? You're just going to suffer anyway. And so I find that now we're in our 30s or in our 40s, hormones are becoming more erratic, and all of a sudden everything really feels like it's up for review. And so how can we, for the girls listening who are really regularly cycling, but also for my ladies who it's becoming erratic, how do we begin to manage our stress response system so that we feel more okay and safe in our body?
Right. So to start with, just like a really interesting, I wanted to just spin off something that you said, which is really interesting. And this is some research that finds that, did you know that walking actually quiets your amygdala?
Oh,
So
yeah,
when you're
girl. My
walking,
amygdala is screaming at me unless if I'm walking, she's like, okay, well, we're cool.
yeah, so it actually has this like reflex where it does quiet that area of the brain. And so it really is incredibly helpful to stress and anxiety. And like if you can do nothing else when you're experiencing that like that moment of extreme stress, that is one of the best things you can do is just put on a pair of shoes and just go for a walk because it does quiet those areas of the brain and that can help you to begin to be able to manage that, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, just a little side cue. Today is stacked. I bet your day is stacked too. I'm running from one and it's a lot of different things. I got interviews, I've got kickoff calls. I kicked off a walking challenge today, speaking of which, and I had a team call with my project manager and I am also booking flights and I'm getting my party invite for the book. Like it's a lot of things. Like my head's on a swivel. That's what it kind of feels like. And so I was supposed to do this call on Zoom and before it was literally 10 minutes before I'm jumping on with you. And I was like, let's take this call. I'm going to take this call on the phone. I'm going to get my butt outside. And it just reset me. Even though I was on a business call with my team, I was able to just walk and reset because I wanted to come in so focused for this conversation. And so I loved that this was a hack for I wasn't overwhelmed per se, but I was, things were moving. And so, if you can even take that call outside or anything that you can do, maybe move something outside, like to a call where you're walking. I mean, it's a powerful reset, even when you think you can't do it.
No, it is. It is 100% a powerful reset. And like you said, like there's always a way to squeeze it in.
Yeah.
Because there's always some conversation you need to have, and this can be a phone call, or it can be you grab your person that you're meeting with and you take it outside. Because I'm definitely somebody who is not above just telling my student or whoever it is that's coming in that we're having a conversation with and that we're going to do it outside. We're going to go for a walk. And generally, even if it's not somebody who enjoys a walk afterward, they're like, that was really good. And it's like, yeah, it is really good. Like it really does helps blood flow. It calms your brain. You can stay focused. It's like it is a really nice hack. I think that the walk is an important one. And then to get to your larger point, I do think that especially for women, the idea of overstress has been way too normalized. And, I think that part of this is just fueled by how much of the world and even the economy depends on women being overly stressed out. I mean, think about how many children's, like baseball teams and, select soccer and all of these businesses would cease to exist if women said, I'm not doing that. I'm not driving my kid to 8 different lessons and I'm not going to be I'm not going to volunteer at the bake sale to raise money there's so many things that rely on women working well beyond what's appropriate in terms of having boundaries for work. And we've all been led to believe that it's normal. And one of the things that I talk about in the period brain is urging people to really reevaluate how they're spending their time, because so many women feel like they don't have enough time for self-care because they're too busy doing all these other things. And it's like spending some time actually thinking about whether or not these other things are necessary, right? And even creating something like a pod of other women who are making the same decisions so that way you don't feel like you're doing it alone. Because I think a lot of times women feel pressure like, oh my gosh, I have to have Jimmy and Betty Sue, in 65 different activities. And if they're not doing all of this and making the decision that when too much is too much, to be able to make sure that you're taking the time for yourself, that your body needs to reset. Because the fact of the matter is, when you look at the statistics right now, it's like women are twice as likely as men to have mental health related illnesses. They're more than twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with anxiety. They're more likely to experience burnout in the workplace. I mean, the list goes on. And it's because there's way too much that's expected of us. And one thing that women don't recognize about this is that in addition to this being bad for things like cardiovascular health, which of course you hear about because, the idea that your blood pressure is raising in the response to stress, but also that it can prevent you from even producing sex hormones. And I think that one of the things I talk about in the period brain is that failure to ovulate is something that is a lot more common than women have any idea. And so just to give you an example from the research that we do in my research lab, we test women's hormonal changes and how they affect psychological functioning and so forth across the month. And when we do this, we always collect data on healthy younger women, right? So we're talking like women like ages like 19 to 26 or 27. So here's women right near peak fertility, right? And we choose a very pristine sample on purpose. So we have women with no endocrine disrupted, and no endocrine disrupting diseases.
Like polycystic ovarian syndrome, thyroid issues, all those types of,
No endometriosis, none of it, right? This is a very pristine sample of healthy women who report that they have clockwork cycles, right? And so here's these women with clockwork cycles. We have them come in, we collect data on them, we measure luteinizing hormone across the cycle and other hormones across the cycle. And without fail, every time that we do data collection, about 30% of the population didn't ovulate. 30% of the women that we pull aren't ovulating. And when I first started doing the research, I thought I was doing something wrong, right? I'm like,
right? You're like, this is weird. Like, we're missing something here.
yeah, I'm like, how are 30% of these women not ovulating? And so I talked to my colleagues who do the same research, and they're like, oh, yeah, no, that's usually what we find. Yeah, 30, 35%, fail to ovulate within a given data collection period. And I mean, this is a lot, and
It's a lot.
I have no idea because we have them report then later when they get their periods and they're still getting a period. And it's because their body is starting, the process of ovulation.
In follicular phase, they're still building the endometrium, whether they pop that egg or not.
Right. And so then what ends up happening, they get it. They have no idea that they're not ovulating. And the number one reason, well, there's two big, huge reasons, and especially, in a college population, the two biggest predictors of failure to ovulate, one, not getting enough calories, right? So burning more calories than you're taking in. So a lot of times we get that in a college population because unfortunately college-aged women are they're at the prime age where they're at risk for eating disorders. And we see a lot of that on a college campus.
Or overworking out athletes. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're not replacing everything that they're burning out. And then number two is stress. And stress is a big suppressor of fertility. And stress takes a lot of different forms. It can take the form of loneliness. So not investing in your relationships with other people and not investing in taking the time that you need to be able to recover, whether it's from the work that you're doing or from the workouts that you're doing, these things create stress in the body. And when our stress system is being pushed to the max, our body isn't going to release an egg because it doesn't want a possibility of pregnancy when it feels like the world is on fire. And so our bodies will do that on purpose. And again, that's something that is denying us the benefit of our full spectrum of hormone release, which is something that, is not good for health, is not good for mental health. And ultimately, especially for a woman who's hoping to get pregnant, it's not something that's going to be supporting that either.
Yeah, no, I agree. And gosh, I think that's such a mic drop moment that this is happening in prime reproductive age and like pristine candidates where it would be almost safe to assume that these women are ovulating every month and they're not.
Right. And one of the things that we're really interested in and that we're starting to begin to kind of poke around in the literature and see what is all known about is whether or not, because there's a rise in women who are going through early menopause.
Yeah.
And the leading idea, currently is, endocrine disrupting compounds. It's like the environment changes and we're exposed to these endocrine disruptors and, maybe that's jacking us all up in a way that we're not ovulating. But it could also be chronic stress. And that is telling the body, like, all right, you're done. Like, that's enough. Like, you are not going to be having any more babies because clearly from all of the stress signals that the brain is receiving, this is not going to be reproducing anyway. So we're shutting it down.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to better understand the relationship between chronic stress and then age of menopause to see whether there's a relationship between those things. I would be absolutely shocked if there was not.
No, I agree. Because right now, what we know for sure is if you're chronic alcoholic, you're drinking a lot or you're smoking a lot, we know that can bring you into menopause a bit earlier. But obviously, we're seeing a major shift across a lot of women who are not chronic drinkers or chronic smokers. And I think it's often a yes and because I think there's insulin resistance at play. There's mitochondrial dysfunction, obviously endocrine disruption, and then also the chronic stress. But all of it, nothing's operating in a silo, Sarah, right? Like none of this. Like if you've got insulin resistance, it's most likely because there's some chronic stress happening. Like, that's playing a role as well. So I'd be interested. I'm waiting to see, because women are Well, one of two things I think about perimenopause. One, we just were gaslighting women. We were dismissing women, who were having symptoms in their late 30s and early 40s. The CDC marks perimenopause at 47 because that's usually when women were having crime scene periods and they were skipping periods more than 60 days. So that we were like, okay, she's maybe not able to have children anymore. Obviously, she's heading towards menopause. Let's call this perimenopause. But now we know that women can be in perimenopause while they're still cycling. And a lot of these symptoms are brain-related symptoms. Almost all of the symptoms are brain-related symptoms. They're not really menstrual cycle symptoms per se, or not enough for us to really notice the menstrual cycle changes per se. We will notice the fact that we can't remember why we walked in a room, or the migraines, or the severe rage bouts, but we may not notice that our cycle went from 28 days to 26 days, And so I think two things were happening. One, women were in perimenopause earlier than we thought, but also now we're seeing that things are just moving gradually earlier and earlier.
Yeah, I think that it is interesting and it's refreshing that doctors are finally starting to take these other symptoms a little bit more seriously instead of it just being like, oh, well, if your periods are the same, then clearly there's nothing wrong. But that's, again, born from the same logic as the idea that, hormones only affect your breasts and your
bikini medicine. Yeah.
Medicine. And now, the fact that they're starting to understand that the first thing that gets affected is the brain, I think in some ways is very refreshing because it does suggest that medicine is beginning to catch on to the idea that hormones affect more than just, the bikini area.
It's such an eye roll moment. I think about that relationship between the brain and the ovaries and how critical these hormones are for the brain to function. And, I share the story about how, what if your master CEO who has shown up to work every day from 9 to 6, really 24/7, all of a sudden one day doesn't show up until 2 p.m, doesn't tell you, doesn't announce it, and then stays until 1 a.m., but doesn't show up the next day at all, and then comes back to work at 6 a.m. And that's estrogen. That's estrogen. Progesterone, same thing. She's just steadily not showing up either. And how the brain's like, what the heck is going on? Like, excuse me, my CEO, COO isn't even showing up anymore. And gosh, the brain's just scrambling to work it out, scrambling to remodel, except that this scramble isn't like a day in time or a month in time. We're talking years of remodeling. And then I think what makes it interesting, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. We still expect a high level of standard from women, a high level of functioning from women, executive functioning from women. And yet we don't want to recognize that the brain is going through this massive transition, whether it's postpartum and pregnancy or it's second puberty. And I just see women trying to do their best, with what they've got, with a brain that is, a lot of ways going through not only decreased energy metabolism, inflammation, all of this. We just need to do better. That's why I'm so happy about the book. I'm so happy that the period brain has been written because I feel like it's so applicable for women, obviously throughout the entire lifetime, but most importantly, when we start to feel shifts. Maybe we didn't feel it a lot in our 20s and even early 30s, but man, come to our mid 30s, even not in perimenopause, we are feeling those changes.
Right. Yeah, we do. And I think that there's so many things in our current environment that have eroded at cellular plasticity and our resilience to hormonal changes that, the way that we experience the second half of the cycle when we're going through this period of intense hormonal change is, it's just far worse than what it actually needs to be. And when we take steps to try to improve our resilience to hormonal changes and try to promote cellular plasticity by doing things that decrease inflammation, that this is something that has a really big effect on the way that we experience the rise and fall of hormones, both that we experience in the second half of the cycle, but then also that we experience, postpartum and that we experience as we go into the menopausal transition. Because the fact is, the cells in the body have to do a lot of work when we're experiencing periods of hormonal change. When there's a whole bunch of hormone present, our cells will retreat their hormone receptors as a way to not get flooded, right? When there's not a lot of hormone, our cells have to sprout new receptors to be able to pick up on the smaller levels of hormone. It just requires a lot of work and it requires a lot of flexibility of our cells. And when we have chronic inflammation eroding this plasticity, it really creates an experience where our body feels like it's going through an emergency all the time as we're going through these big hormonal changes. And so, a big part of the period brain is first just really giving women a roadmap to the second half of their cycles, since it's not something that's really talked about, right? Like we oftentimes talk about like, oh, estrogen and it does all these wonderful things and isn't it great? And we want sex and doesn't that make sense because sex can lead to conception and how cute and fun is that? And then we look at the luteal phase and we look at progesterone. It's just like, PMS, it's just like
womp womp. Well, and if anything, it's always been the highlight, but again, the suffering highlight, the you're going to feel like crap highlight. Like it wasn't. And I want women to know that the period brain is about the entire cycle, not just about, unfortunately, we live in this patriarchal society where, you think in a patriarchal society, it would be about reproduction. It would be about ovulation. It would be about the main event. And yet it's about the period, which is fascinating, but it's the whole thing. Like we need to understand all of it, but particularly where women are struggling the most, which is in that luteal phase.
Yeah, and it really is, so much of what we know about women and about health and what we think we know about women and health has been grounded in research that was either based on men or based on women in the early stages of their cycle. And the reason for this is researchers oftentimes are trying to control for the impact of women's hormones on different types of interventions that they're doing. But what this means is that we're not really given a roadmap to the luteal phase. We're not given like an idea of what normal looks like when you're on this other side of the cycle. And so part of the book is just trying to help women understand that. Like, hey, understand that during the second half of the cycle, you need more recovery time. You need a greater number of calories every day if you want to not feel hungry because your body's actually burning more. Like the nature of your sexual desire changes and it shifts from being about sort of attraction and just this like need to sort of scratch and itch. And it's more about connection. So just overall sexual desire tends to decrease, and the sexual desire that women do have is motivated by the desire to connect with their partner, right? And so it's like the nature of our sexuality changes, our energy needs change, our ability to pick up on potential signs of potential threat change and becomes more sensitive. And so understanding these things can give us a language by which we can actually use to understand ourselves and be able to better communicate with our partners about how we're experiencing the world. Because especially if you have a male partner, they don't cycle, right? They have no idea what's going on. And being able to communicate about that just really makes for a closer, more intimate relationship. It can prevent a lot of unnecessary arguing and fights because somebody, like if your partner's trying to mind read you, but they don't have a mind that cycles, they're not going to be able to understand it. They're not going to understand you. And so giving women the tools that they need to be able to understand themselves, communicate about themselves, get what they need out of the relationship, and then also a whole, section on ways that we can sort of optimize how we're feeling during this period that is characterized by these big mood or these big hormonal changes, and promoting our resilience to these hormonal changes. So that way it feels a little bit more like riding a wave as we go across the cycle and less like falling off a cliff, which is how a lot of women feel. And as noted, it's like our environment right now, it's like everybody's overstressed. We don't prioritize our close relationships with other people who create an environment of social support for us. We eat foods that tend to promote inflammation. People aren't getting sunlight. And sunlight is one of the things that helps us set our circadian clock and getting us enough sleep. And it also helps to influence our immune system. And getting sunlight every day actually decreases inflammation in and of itself. We don't get as much movement as we need, right? We're exposing ourselves to endocrine disrupting compounds that also eroded our resilience to hormonal changes. So there's all kinds of these environmental changes that have happened in the last 200 years that have taken what's this really lovely priority shift going on in our bodies, at a cellular level, where we're shifting between attraction and sex and then to implantation and pregnancy, and has created it and made it feel awful. And so a lot of the book is, first just providing a roadmap to what is actually going on throughout the cycle and who are we as we transition between a state, that's the estrogen you to progesterone you, and then how to promote your resilience to those changes so it doesn't feel terrible. And a lot of these things, because, we know from research that women who have have a terrible premenstrual experience, tend to have a terrible postpartum experience, and also tend to have a terrible perimenopausal experience is a lot of these skills translate. And so if women are able to build their resilience to these changes and promote cellular plasticity when they're young and cycling, they'll have an easier postpartum experience and they'll likely have an easier perimenopausal transition as well.
Yeah, no, I feel that. And I feel like this is going to be really beneficial for our future generations. I know a lot of women are listening to that. And they're like, girl, I'm in this. I didn't do it. But there's so much that you can do today now. Like if you're in perimenopause right now, there's still so much that we can do to help regulate our system and to help support our system. I'll be honest with you, I'm supposed to start my period. I kind of felt some changes yesterday. I take oral micronized progesterone. And I'm like, this week is just too much. Like, I think I'm just going to keep riding this train.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
All right, Annie, where do we get? So the book is available where books are sold. I have it on Audible. I already pre-ordered my book on Audible. I obviously have the copy, but I love listening to it. Where would you love us to go to get it? Do you have bonuses and goodies? And where would you love us to find you?
You can find me online on my website. My website is sarahehill.com, and that's Sarah with an H. You can find my book anywhere that books are sold. I have resources on my website that you can download to help you keep track of your cycle. And those things are available free of charge. And so please feel free to go and download. And then also you can find me on social media. I'm Sarah E. Hill, PhD. And again, Sarah with an H. And you can find me on all platforms, but I'm most active on Instagram.
Thank you, baby. I will have all the links in the show notes as well, but I want you guys to go and get the book and give it to somebody. But this is more so, I know a lot of my ladies are either in perimenopause and menopause, but you've got friends, you've got nieces, you've got daughters as well. And we deserve to understand what's happening to our bodies, what's happening to our brain. That knowledge is power, and it really can influence how we live into the second half of our life, but also how we leave a legacy to the people that matter most to us.
I love it. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Sorry, girl. I was like, I just want you all to get it.
Yes, that was perfect.
Thanks, Eddie. Thank you so much for watching. Now, if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you are ready to learn more about perimenopause and how to navigate with a lot of ease and grace, be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you can join our community. Don't forget to share this video with someone that you love, that you know is navigating the perimenopause journey as well, because they deserve to feel their best too. See you in the next video.